And you'll see their dead, scattered bodies all over the top of the countertop and in the sink where I drowned them.
That's our cold opening.
Yeah. And then I did just see... Sorry, Charlie's talking to me.
So both of us have seen Planet of the Apes. We are going to talk about that for this whole episode. So if you haven't seen it, this is definitely one that you should go out and see. So you can pause this right now and go see it, come back and listen to our thoughts. So we have both seen the new Matt Reeves film, War for the Planet of the Apes, right?
Yeah, the titles get confusing.
Yeah.
I think this is the most clear one. Dawn and Rise were confusing because I kind of felt like...
Both of those are the beginning.
Yeah, Dawn is before Rise. No, see, that's what I'm saying. Okay. Rise is the first one.
Yep.
But I feel like the Dawn should be coming before the Rise. And
it does feel earlier.
A strong argument could even be made that you have the Dawn and then the War and then the Rise.
That's true. Maybe.
So there's multiple formulations here.
It's true. But there's only one truth, and that is Rise of the Planet of the Apes is first. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is second.
And the new one is War for the
Planet
of the Apes.
And War for the Planet of the Apes is what we just saw.
And I'll tell you what, Charlie. You want to know what I'm going to tell you?
I do. What do you want to tell me, Dan?
This was a 10 times better remake of the classic biblical Moses tale than Ridley Scott's Exodus, God and Kings.
I never saw that one.
It was not worth it. Like, for poor reasons.
The same amount
too.
of white people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Right. This one just took place in America, so
it was just awful. Like, give me the old Ten Commandments movie with Charleston Heston any day.
So, how did you go see the movie, Dan?
I was on vacation over the past week when a friend got married in Chicago, and then I went back with another friend from the wedding to Grand Rapids to hang out for a few days, and we both saw it there because we like sci-fi stuff. So
nice.
I actually saw it up in Grand Rapids, and nice theater and everything, and that's how we saw it. Nice, comfortable seats
with a good friend.
Normal screen. Yeah, exactly. How about you?
So,
you saw it with a bunch of people, didn't you?
There were other people in the theater. So you said to me on Tuesday, I believe, hey, we should go see, I forget which movie it was, whenever you
Valerian.
get back. Yeah. And I was like, actually, we should go see that tonight because it's $5 movie night. And after a little bit of discussion, we decided, you know what? You have already seen Planet of the Apes, and I should go see that so that we can do a podcast episode on it because it's a good movie. We both like the other two, and it's popular right now.
And the podcast runs our lives.
And the podcast runs, not ruins, our lives, right. Which enriches our lives.
Let's leave that pronunciation open to interpretation for the listeners.
We've been doing this so long that
right.
Sometimes it becomes a job. No, so
tell us, audience, write in and let us know. What do you think he said?
So the point of this story is within a day I needed to find some people to go see a movie because I, Dan, had never seen a movie in the theaters on my own before.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever done this?
Yeah, sadly, I have once, but it's one of those things where I'm angry about it, not because I saw a movie by myself, but because society holds us at a standard where that's unacceptable and lame.
Oh, see,
And while in many cases I get that, like, because it's like you just go and see a movie by yourself and you can't wait to go with someone, it's kind of lame. But also there's been times where it's just like, you know what? I got a day off. I got nothing to do. And I'd like to just go see a movie just for fun.
I think that's totally acceptable.
I would hope so, but I don't think society allows us to do that.
See, I have lots of friends who do this all the time, so it doesn't seem weird to me from that level.
Yeah.
But for me personally, as someone with a uncomfortable degree of social anxiety, maybe in situations that I'm not necessarily comfortable with.
Yeah.
I was very much dreading it.
I will say, like, I prefer to see it with people, which is really weird because a movie theater experience, it's not really something where you're talking
That's
or
true.
socializing with the person. Well, some people do, but they're bad people.
Right, right.
But I mean, it's not really something that you're socializing with the person next to you. But for some weird reason, it's just I mean, I like experiencing things with people,
Right.
and so much so that like I see movies a lot. Like if there's a movie I really like, I'll see it in the theater a couple times, and my own family will kind of joke with me and be like, you're gonna go see it again?" And I don't really do that much anymore, but I have done that, and it's weird because really all it is like even if I've seen something, if I enjoyed it enough to want to see it again, I like experiencing it with people.
Right. Well, half the fun is talking about it beforehand and afterwards.
Right. That too.
So my anxiety was more around the being there alone beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried not to get there too early. Luckily, Ronnie's theater by us now has reserved seating, so I could reserve a seat and I could just show up at the very last minute. So I didn't really have to deal with that too much. And it was $5 movie night, which means I get my free popcorn. And I had a coupon for free soda, so I'm all loaded up with all my gear. I get in my nice, comfy chair, lean the seat back, sit up the feet rest. I'm sunk into my seat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm next to a kind of I don't know how to appropriately say it, but a person who maybe spilled over the edge of their seat a little bit into my seat more than was comfortable. But they're oversized seats, so it's not a huge deal. So I'm good. I'm sunk into my seat. Everything is good. I'm like, man, you know what? This isn't so bad. And then the trailers start,
Mm-hmm.
and the very first one that pops up looks interesting. I don't know what it is. It's just a rock. And then there's suddenly that all too familiar musical cue.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately I realize this is the Star Wars trailer.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sitting in between somebody who's way too uncomfortably close to me and a couple where the woman to the left of me clearly doesn't really want to be in a sci-fi movie, but she's there for her male companion friend.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have to decide, do I do what I do whenever I'm with you or my wife or other friends, where I just put my head down, shove my fingers in my ears, and make weird noises so that I can't hear any of the dialogue? And I can't bring myself to do that. So instead I decide I need to get out of this theater immediately, which I start to do before I realize I'm sunk into a chair with the footrest down.
Mm-hmm.
So from now, this is all happening in a matter of seconds, but from the people next to me's perspective,
It feels like lifetimes.
exactly. From the people's next to me perspective, this trailer starts, and the kid next to them, who's all alone, suddenly convulses, tries to get out of his chair, and realizes that the footrest is up and he can't. And then, like, with his popcorn in his hand, looks straight down, shoves one finger in one ear, and then is hitting the down button to try and get the thing to go down, and then just scurries off out of the theater without any warning.
So why don't we tell people why this is such a big deal? So you're talking about the new Star Wars trailer came on, and why is this a big deal? I'll let you explain, because we're both on the same page here.
So this is probably a topic for discussion that we can have at some point, but the short version is, after a short period of experimentation with going, full media blackout on movies that I'm planning on already seeing, I've kind of dialed in a level of spoilers that I want to avoid depending on the type of movie. And Star Wars is right at the top of the list of types of movies that I'm going to be super excited about no matter what, and I'm going to go see no matter what. So I should just avoid basically everything that I can. I'll allow myself posters, but if I see an article in the newspaper or in the like a blog or news or something, I'll quickly scroll down. I won't read the titles, and trailers are the obvious no-no. And so even hearing dialogue is I know this sounds crazy, but even hearing dialogue is a spoiler, especially nowadays. And so the more clean and pure I can go into a movie like that, the more I tend to enjoy it. So I think that sums it up.
Yeah, I think we that's a whole, you're right. That is kind of a whole topic that there's a myriad of issues that touches on about like spoiler cultures that I could go on with for a
Oh
while.
yeah.
So we may definitely touch on that in an upcoming episode. But yeah, I mean, long story short, we both are kind of like trying to avoid the Star
Right.
Wars
But
trailer
usually I'm with
mainly
a
in this
person
season.
who understands my insanity. And so
Right. And then this
it's easy
time
to
you
deal
just
with.
looked.
Instead, this time I confirmed the insanity.
So, Planet of the Apes. This is the third in a trilogy. I guess we should both kind of mention that I feel like we both very strongly like the first two movies
Yeah, definitely.
quite a
Did
bit.
you watch them recently before we watched this?
Yep. My little sister had seen the first one, and her husband had not seen either of them, but is just like kind of always up for watching sci-fi stuff because I've noticed we have a lot of similar interests in movies, and so they came over one night and we cooked some hamburgers, and it was funny because they were gonna come over to just kind of like hang out, like we were gonna like play games or something. We weren't really sure what we were gonna do, and while we were eating, we started watching the first one because I had told her husband about it in the past. And he was like, "Oh yeah, that looks cool." And so we started watching it, and we watched the first one, and then after it was over, I was like, "So, how about the second one?" And they're like, "Yeah, let's just watch the second
All
one." And so
right, we came this
we
far.
watched like about 5 hours of movies, and
And then next thing you know, we've watched the original 5 and then we went ahead and watched the Tim Burton one.
funny thing that I have the five sitting right in front of me, and that night after they had left, I did pop in the Charlton Heston one and start watching it. I didn't make it through all five because I then had to go on vacation that week, but yeah, I definitely started because it's
So
too much to finish.
I hadn't watched the first one in years. I mean, it's been a really long time. And the second
Yeah,
one, I don't know that I've watched even since saw it in theaters. I mean, I really, really
you're
liked
talking
it,
about
but
the new
I
ones,
just
by the way.
yeah. Right. So I poked around on YouTube and found a very new YouTube channel that I'll put in the show notes because I'm going to keep this in my back burner. It's it's called Speedy Summaries, and
Hmm.
literally it's like 2.5 3 minute just
Recaps.
summaries of the movie with images, which is who knows how long this thing will last. I don't know if this falls under fair use or not, but it was
Right.
extremely helpful because I just wanted to get that quick recap, and it went through like you know this is what this happened and this character did this and then this character did this and you had a visual that went with it and a quick recap. I found it really really helpful for that. So it also gave me a sort of visual reminder of where the visual effects have come. And
Oh
I'm
yeah.
curious what you thought of that progression before we really get into the movie itself.
Well, it's weird because like I kind of feel like maybe just now we're getting to the point with the CGI stuff as far as like moving characters where I feel like we're still in the uncanny valley area, and I've heard other people kind of say well, like they feel like Apes is the first two Apes movies are like like gold standard of like this is everything, like this is the best possible thing ever. And I agree, like it's amazing, like and it gets the job done. But I even thought with the first one and when the second one came out, which was even better than the first one, like I remember thinking like, oh yeah, like this is absolutely amazing, but I can still tell it's CGI. But I'm not the type of person that gets like bothered by that stuff, and I feel like there's other people that don't want to admit that out loud because they feel like that would be a criticism of some sort. But I just feel like the technology's like constantly improving, and I think even in the first movie it was absolutely amazing. I just feel like you can clearly see a progression of the CGI apes getting better and better. I don't know
Right.
what you were about to say, but that's how I felt. And honestly, with this third movie, it was again even better. And I think it also depends on what they're spending time on. So, like, for instance, I was listening to another podcast that they just do movies, and it's called You Hate Movies, by the way. It's a good little...
Yes, I was going to make sure we brought that
Yeah,
up as well.
yeah, because it's a great little movie podcast that we listen to, and they pointed out, and we're kind of making a joke about how like they love the movies as well, and they were saying in the second one like they spent so much time on the apes and spent like almost none on the CGI deer and bear at the beginning
Right,
of the
exactly.
movie, and so like that's absolutely true. So it also depends on what they're spending time on. And movies have limits, they can't do everything. Sometimes they've done as much as they can with the money and time that they have. They have to meet deadlines. So like with the second movie, they were like working on that famous, like, well, at least I think it's famous, like tank scene where it like pans around during the attack.
Oh,
Like
yeah,
apparently
yeah.
they were still editing that like up towards the movie.
Right.
And there's just like things like that. So I can kind of give a pass on the fact that we're still in the uncanny valley. Like I even feel that way like watching shows like Westworld or even newer movies like Ex Machina is an amazing movie, but there's still moments and like glimpses of something where you can tell that's digital.
Yeah, well, and that
And
Ex Machina especially, that was an indie movie, which is what made it kind of incredible what they did with that.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
then TV shows, obviously, just it's not necessarily just the budget, but the time constraints that really kill visual
Yeah,
effects in those.
exactly.
Yeah, I would. So the way I would sort of categorize the big milestones, I feel like in each one is the first one got movement down in a way that I had never seen before. I mean, obviously Gollum was a giant leap, and I don't know that I would even say the first Planet of the Apes was at that level of progression, but it rendered extraordinarily like real feeling apes. I don't think anywhere in
Yeah.
those movies did they feel like they were actually there.
Yeah.
But like
I actually think it got better as the movie went on because I remember
the baby monkey did not look great.
yeah, the very first monkey that you open the scene on does not look great, but then as the movie progresses, it feels like they get better.
Yeah.
Now that could be an effect of you're watching the movie and getting more engrossed in it, but I also just kind of feel like that was the first thing that they did.
I think they spent more time on the monkeys you see more, which is we're saying monkeys. I feel like that's for some reason in my head that's offensive. The apes
Yeah.
that you see
Don't
later.
Don't be one of those people.
I don't know.
They're chimpanzees.
I feel like I hear people say that enough that I feel like it's wrong for some reason, but I have no
those
idea.
are the type of
why.
people I want to punch in the face. Not that I support violence, nor have I ever punched someone in the face. I don't think, not that I'm aware of. Which is also a weird way to put it, but on the times that I'm sober and aware, I can't remember punching anybody.
Yeah, I can't speak for all those blackouts every Thursday
Right, exactly.
night. No, but so the first one was, it got movement down to a degree that was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And like a lot of the facial features, I'm including that kind of in there. But they always, to me, felt digital, like they were there. It doesn't take me out remotely. But then again, Jar Jar Binks doesn't take me out either. So
Yeah.
I'm obviously in the minority there.
Right.
But
Well, those are different. Like with stuff like Avatar, Golem, Jar Jar Binks, like those are all not real.
right, they don't represent a thing that you know. That's a good point.
Yeah.
But then Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was the first one where it was like, these feel like they could just be real. Like there's parts of those where you could have told me that they had brought on, like real apes on set, and
Mhm.
for certain shots they were real, or at least they were partially real or something. Like that to me was amazing. But where they interacted with the environment
Mhm.
is where I feel like that would fall down usually.
Well, and also to because I want to give credit where I heard it from again is that You Hate Movies podcast. They had mentioned apparently, I think with the second movie, I think they were saying it was one of the first movies that really kind of plunged into like we're just going to do this stuff outside. So like apparently a lot of the environment was real.
Yeah, well, so
And it's not to say
it was
no one ever did a CGI scene outside, but it was the first time I guess they kind of did it on that scale and like
Well, so what it was they developed a motion capture system for outside.
Oh, okay.
So like when our good friend Andy Serkis was doing Gollum for Lord of the Rings, that was also outside.
Mm.
But they weren't using a motion capture rig. Like those were, he was wearing a gray suit and they were using him as a reference, but they were then just adding that all, like they were animating and building Gollum manually after the
Mm.
fact. They
Yeah.
may have actually brought in motion capture later, but like the outside, you know, you've seen the scene of him like falling down the creek. I think you talked
Yeah.
about that before. Um, that wasn't using a
Yeah, we
motion
discussed that
capture.
he deserved an award for that.
Yeah, okay. we that wasn't
That's a
using
callback.
a motion capture rig with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. So the way that the industry kind of moved was they started building these rigs where they can like digitally capture all of your movement, which gives the animation a much better jump start for things, and you can get a lot more realistic stuff. That's like Polar Express or the Christmas Carol.
Right.
Like those movies were kind of doing that too, and Avatar and all of that. And what Dawn of the Planet of the Apes did was push that where you can now bring that motion capture technology outdoors. And so now they can be out in the woods with all the ping pong balls on and the face capturing rigs. And so the interaction with the environment is like ridiculously better because
Yeah.
it actually is like their shadows could actually be used. They probably weren't most of the time, but they had a reference for what a shadow in that exact lighting system looked like.
Oh,
You know what I'm
okay.
saying?
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
So like
yeah.
that's part of why they just looked like they were really there.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, interactions with humans and all of that stuff just didn't feel like it was quite. There were still plenty of times where I feel like it kind of fell down a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Like there's a couple times where like a human had to interact with someone and you could tell they're like holding something that's probably green or
Right,
blue.
right. But in War for
Um,
the Planet of the Apes, the one we just saw,
mhm.
I felt like, I mean, it was
They
like,
got it all
oh my
down.
gosh, almost everything looked incredible, and like specifically the orangutan interacted a lot with that girl. Like there were scenes where
Yeah.
I swear I haven't looked at this. I've heard people say that they didn't bring any like practical effects on set, but there's parts where
Mhm.
she's like rubbing her hands through its hair that they had to
Yeah.
have a physical thing there. Because I was
Yeah, I
analyzing
don't
it and
know.
I was like, my goodness, like that looks. I mean, maybe that it
Yeah.
was a digital hand. I didn't think of that. Like her hand was digital. Because it was, I mean, it was just
Oh,
so freaking good.
yeah, it looked great. Like one thing that they increasingly did better as the movies went is, well, one, the fact that they can get us to care so much about these CGI apes and they focused almost entirely on them, which was a bold move, but it worked out. But just like the facial
Yeah.
expressions, the fact that you can tell a difference between these apes that normally you'd just be like,
Yeah, they made realistic, non cartoonish apes that all were very identifiable characters, but yet felt real and like they were part. Like it felt like you knew who they were because you understood their character. Like, oh, he has
right.
these cuts on his face, or like he has this little, you know, specific facial feature type. Like that must have been there must have spent so much time just on character design.
Oh yeah, and their attention to detail was insane because like I pointed this out to my friend that I saw the movie with, and one of the things that I notice is the orangutan in the movie. What's his name? Maurice. In the second movie, at the end of the movie, there's a whole like throwdown between kind of the bad ape Koba and Caesar, the main character, and there's a fight, and before the fight ends where they're like fighting in this being built skyscraper, like Koba grabs a gun and just like fires it off, and it just like a spray of bullets like go by, and one of them like hits the edge of Maurice's face, and in this movie you just see like very faintly like a little scar like in the same spot.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't notice that.
Yeah. And because I watched the movies back to back, there were like all kinds of like little things like that where it's just like, yeah, they kept a catalog of what these characters have been through. And they just had like this attention to detail into the next movie that was just insane. In addition to these all feel like separate characters that that you can that you can get behind, and you can tell the difference between like the amount of attention that they paid to the
Yeah.
characters themselves was just really cool. It would be like the opposite of what I feel like the Transformers movies have probably done, where it'd be like if in the first Transformers Optimus Prime got in this big throwdown with some robot, in the next movie you see the scratches from where he
Right.
was
Right.
hit. Like it was that type of detail, but
Yeah.
that's not what Transformers has done.
Transformers is just slowly turning into a 2-hour transform of just metal flying around, and everybody's like, "Yeah, this is fine."
The only thing that I want to ask about the one character that I thought they didn't do well with, which is more of a minor thing, between me and my sister's husband, because we thought it was funny to point out. In the very first movie, there's a whole part where Caesar is in that, like, what is it, animal reserve that he's taken to, or
Yeah, yeah.
zoo thing, whatever that is.
Where Draco
And in order to like
Malfoy
gain
is,
power, yeah, and in order to like gain power over that baldish ape, he like goes out at nighttime into the area where they're all supposed to be asleep, and he lets this huge gorilla out of its cage to like kind of like get the big humongous muscly gorilla on his side. And on the cage it says Buck. So there is a gorilla named Buck, and me and my sister's husband have like this ongoing joke that every gorilla that we see, we're just like, that's probably Buck. He can't be dead, because they never really bring him up again, and he's not like a main character
I
afterwards.
thought, didn't he sacrifice himself by like taking down that helicopter?
I don't know.
I thought that was a big moment, and
Probably,
I haven't seen it in a long time.
Probably, but there were multiple gorillas in the movie at that point on the bridge, and we are holding out hope that Buck is still rolling around somewhere. with the group.
Hashtag Buck is still rolling around.
Yeah, that
has,
sounds
a,
so good.
has a nice ring to it.
Hashtag Buck lives.
Mm.
Hashtag Harambe. His hashtag is Harambe Buck.
The mysteries.
But anyways, so that's just a little side thing that I noticed. So if anybody can tell whether or not Buck was the one that went down with the helicopter in the first movie, I would be very interested in knowing, because it's hard to tell.
I want to talk to you about something that I think you've hinted that you picked up on as well. Around the time that Caesar has been sort of embedded into the slave camp, for lack of a better word, you know, there's a group of apes that are just too tired and they fall down, and he yells out something along the lines of, you know, stop that, or I don't remember his exact wording.
Right.
And my immediate thought was, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if they're channeling a little Charlton Heston Moses thing there. Did you get that? I don't remember what made me think that, but
yeah, I feel like it's common, especially because we live in like a Western society, that you see like a lot of these biblical allusions in a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a very clear, not even just that scene, but multiple things. I feel like there was like this very strong Moses motif.
I had that thought, but in my head at that point, it was a Charlton Heston vibe, right?
Gotcha.
I thought, oh, I wonder if that's a sort of callback to the fact, you know, he was in the originals. Obviously, you know that.
Right.
But then as the movie kept going, and that was always kind of churning in the back of my head, there was just one thing after another, kind of like what you were just saying. And
right.
I didn't know if this was a really obvious. I haven't read anything afterwards, so I don't know if this is something that everybody really picked up on. But I was interested that seemed to be your response as well.
Yeah, because it wasn't just that. I mean, and now I feel like it was more of a like slavery and bondage motif, and it was using heavily from Moses because that was a popular one. Like even back in like the American slavery time period, like Civil War time period, like one of the big arguments on the anti-slavery side would a lot of times point towards the entire premise of the Moses thing, like them escaping slavery and stuff like that. And it was seen as this like redemption story. And, you know, of course, people argued about the other side of different verses in the Bible and stuff like that too. But the point being is like the Moses story was of this very strong motif, or this very strong story about like anti-slavery and them getting out of bondage from Egypt and all this stuff. And so it was like that was a strong theme back then. And in this movie, you see a lot of this, like they're captured, they're seen as others, they're treated as slaves to do like work on stuff for these like men, that don't really see them as human, because I mean they're kind of not, but that's kind of the point, is it's
Right.
blurring the lines. And then you even have a someone is being whipped to
Mm-hmm.
death, and the leader feels this strong urge to tell their captors to stop. And then, not to mention, you literally get an underground railroad at
Oh
one
yeah, I
point
didn't
in the
think about
movie.
that. The one I picked on up after that was as they're escaping, a giant army turns towards them, and then maybe not a flood or not water, but a giant avalanche is what comes and saves them.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah,
then they
and
journey through the desert to the promised land, so to
the
speak.
promised
And
land. Yeah,
then they're standing on a hill overlooking the promised land. And
right.
the leader, because potentially a mistake that he made in this case, he couldn't give up his hate and he had to go fight, and that's
Yeah,
kind of what led to him getting that shrapnel hit. He died
yeah.
overlooking his people entering the promised land. I was like, holy cow.
And that death, and the death itself was a bit of a Godfather Part 3, if you
Are
understand
you
that.
talking about the slow fall?
Yeah, just the last scene of the movie is just this awkward, like Al Pacino just head falls over dead.
So what what that made me think, when I was leaving the theater, I was sitting there like, has this been a thing the whole time that I just totally missed?
Oh
Because
yeah.
not this movie, I
Well,
mean in the other movies. Because the first thing that came to my head was one of the specific images that I can remember from the first movie is Caesar the baby in a basket. Because doesn't he
mhm.
like I can't really remember the first movie well, but doesn't he
He is like,
breaks him out of the
uh,
facility in a basket, right? Like he doesn't get
yeah,
permission
yeah.
to.
No, I don't think that motif was all through it, because I think it was more just. I honestly think that particular thing was more just for this movie, because it was taking a different angle. So, like, also keep in mind that this director only did the last two. He
Right,
didn't do
right.
the first
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
and so maybe, but I don't I didn't really see that in the first one, and I feel like the second one was more about war and conflict. And surprisingly, even though the third one's called War for the Planet of the Apes, and it still had some of those carryover elements, it was more about like bondage, slavery,
For
oppression,
sure. Yeah, yeah.
those sorts of things. Not only
Leadership.
that, but also blurring the lines, like what makes us human. It was about mercy. It was about humans being afraid of other, like,
This
and
was by
being,
far my favorite character development of Caesar as a leader too. Cuz
yeah,
like, in Dawn he had to sort of fight Koba, but that Dawn was extremely good, don't get me wrong, but like you didn't necessarily see him grow the same way. Like Caesar was a constant good leader in that. And this one, it was like, he broke whenever his family was killed, and you got to see him like learn that
right,
like he needs to lead. And I don't know, there was a bunch of different really cool themes that they played around with there that I thought were good.
yeah,
Like, would they have even been captured if he had just stayed with them, that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah, absolutely,
So this is just like, it seemed like it was way too similar to feel like it was on accident, but it may not have been on purpose. Did that hill, when they first were coming over that, did that not look exactly like the opening to 2001 Space Odyssey? Did you notice that?
yeah, I don't know.
You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I remember yeah, I know
Where
what you're talking
they
about.
like pick up the bone and they learn how to, use it as a tool. It looked
Yeah, I don't
so
think,
similar that I like felt like it had to be on purpose, but maybe not.
I don't know. I'd have to watch it again, because I've only seen that movie once, and I don't even remember.
Ah,
I
see, the
vaguely
only
remember
reason I
that
think that
opening and stuff.
is like, well, one, it looked just like it, but then it really fits into the theme of like, this is because in 2001 that's the scene where like apes start learning, and they kind of, that's their beginning of their transition to man, so to speak,
Yeah,
in that movie. But in this, it was like, this is their transition into kind of taking over moment at the end of
Right.
this movie. This is where they kind of come together. I don't know. It was just an interesting thought. I've avoided reading anything or listening to any podcasts on this because I didn't want both of us to read the same thing and then just talk about the same things everybody else did.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things on my list that I want to look at and see if that really was intentional, because I thought that was kind of cool. I don't really want to go through all the plot points, but there's a couple key things I kind of wanted to just get your thoughts on. What did you think of our sort of comic relief character in this one? The
I actually loved that. Like, I thought it was going to be. I thought that character was going to be like super annoying and be like Jar Jar Binks of the Planet of the Apes movies, but it ended up like it really worked out really well, and they didn't overplay it.
Yeah, I thought he was both believable and funny. Like I really really enjoyed him. I The theater I was in maybe was enjoying him too much. They laughed hysterically at everything he did, to the point where it almost made me like want to not like him,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
But no,
But it did.
I thought he
It
was
did
just
work
really
really
great.
well.
His voice was just so
Yeah.
goofy, but like
Uh huh.
again, very believable. And then the fact that he kind of wore human clothes, I don't know. I thought he was a really really good character.
Is a surprising move too, because like these movies have all been like super depressing and serious, and
Yeah,
it was just really weird that they're like, hey, let's put in a
like it added a layer of like relief every once in a while that was needed, because this wasn't,
yeah.
Dawn was a movie that was all about building tension to this sort of breaking point, and this movie was not that and didn't need to be. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was driven by different motives, and so I feel like having a sort of comic relief helped you keep the characters relatable in a way that Dawn didn't necessarily, not that Dawn didn't do a good job of,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, but like it just added another layer to it that I thought was really really good.
And I feel like they had to set up some stuff because I don't think they're done with the series. I don't know
That's
any
true. This
news.
is supposed to be a trilogy, and this was the final of that trilogy, but it's not the end of the sort of universe. But it was intended to be a self-contained trilogy still, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I'm also hoping they'll just kind of, as they want to now, like do more. And I feel like they kind of left some stuff open.
Yeah.
Bec- for instance, the little girl, like that's weird that they just. I mean, it's not a weird that they had that character in the movie, but it seemed like intentional that they had her just randomly go with all of them at the end of the movie. Uh, like she was with the group of apes, and she's the only one. So like I could see that being like a 20 years later type thing, and then
Right.
they have some like actress playing her or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Because like you like I can already see the next moves. It's like something where it's like years later, then a guy like runs into the group, and it's the first person she's ever seen, and she's grown up in this like
Romeo
Tarzan,
and
like a
Juliet.
reverse Tarzan.
Ooh, yeah, there you go. Speaking of the girl, what did you think about the humans not being able to talk, like virus thing?
That was interesting because like one of the things that this series has done well, even though well, people have mixed feelings on certain movies in the old Planet of the Apes. So there was the five old ones, and I actually like watching all of them, but I'm also a fan, and so I realize they're not all of the same quality,
Right.
and so they're kind of mismatched. So this series has done a much better job of rebooting everything consistently and explaining why everything is like it is. So, like for instance, the old Planet of the Apes movie, the thing that it did well was it actually. I know you said you don't really remember it, or maybe you didn't see the whole thing, but it did really well on being like a traditional science fiction movie that had like a lot of cultural commentary, and that's kind of what was smart about it. It wasn't necessarily the concept itself; it's that it just presented this concept as like a cold fact, and then made a lot of interesting like religious and science commentary, some commentary on like racism and all this stuff, which was like really innovative for its time, and that's why it's considered a classic. But what this movie did better, or this series has done better, which is really rare by the way. Normally remakes aren't better than the originals, they at least just stand up. But what it did better was it not only made these different commentaries, but actually explained the entire rationale for everything much better. So, with that said, and answering to your specific question, like that plot point in the movie was interesting because, like in the first movie, one, they explain why do the apes get smart. In the old movies, it's just presented as, oh, like there's this planet with smart apes. And then, there's the twist ending where you find out that it's Earth, but nonetheless, they don't really explain it. And as the series goes, it's just kind of like, yeah, these smart apes are on Earth, and then they go back in time through a time loop, and then that becomes the rise of the apes. But it doesn't really make much sense. And in this one, they explain like, well, there's this like they were trying to make a cure for Alzheimer's, and this disease like affected them. And then they kind of moved it forward at the end of the movie and into the second one, and they're like, and then it made humans like it had an adverse effect on humans, and they started to die out. And then in this one, they pushed it even further, and they were like, and then it actually started to like devolve humans, which
Was
in the
that
old movies, another just like cold fact that you're presented is humans don't talk and they're
okay?
stupid.
That was exactly the question I had. Was that a thing in the
Yes.
old one? I don't remember that, but keep in mind
Yeah. So
most of my
like
perspective on
even
the old one is the Tim Burton Marky Mark version, which
oh
is
right.
obviously everybody's
Yeah, but
favorite.
it was even so much a point that it was made a plot point that like when Charleston Heston first arrives on the planet, like obviously he doesn't know anything at first. When they start exploring around, they get like rounded up by the apes like in this field, and that's his first introduction to them. But as they're being rounded up, they're like firing on the people because they're all like scattering and running, and he gets like conveniently shot in the neck to where it like temporarily pierces his vocal cords. So that's the whole thing is like for the first quarter of the movie, he's trying to convince these apes that he's not stupid,
Hmm.
but he can't talk.
I really need to watch
And
through
so
those.
they're just like, oh, it's great. Like because it immediately goes really hard into like, well, humans can't talk because our holy book says, and it's like this really interesting like commentary on like science and religion
Hmm.
and like all this
So
stuff.
yeah, that's
So
interesting because I did not have that perspective. So I was like confused. I assume as soon as you saw like, oh, the girl can't speak, your brain went, oh, that's really clever. But I had no idea what that was going on. But I still found it very interesting, and I like wanted to understand it more.
it actually wasn't even necessary. It was just kind of like, oh, that's a nice solidification of what you've been building on.
Right.
So, or it was like a nice build on to what they had already rationally explained pretty well. It kind of
So
completed the
I would
picture.
agree it's obviously not necessary, but it was necessary for this movie or for the plot that they went with.
Oh
because
yeah, it played into
it
the
was
theme.
so important for why
Woody Harrelson's
why
commander.
Woody Harrelson was as crazy as he was, because
Yeah,
like his son, he had to like kill his own son,
yeah,
and it sort of set him on this path where he was going to be completely crazy. And he would not, like, I don't think a normal human in that environment would have like enslaved apes, like they might have killed them all or whatever, but like for the framework of this movie it was almost completely necessary, which is so cool. Like in my head it didn't feel
Well,
forced remotely, it felt very natural. But it turns out like that was
yeah,
probably what they were driving towards, was kind of answering that question in the originals.
and with that there was also like this deeper tension of like he was well there's the surface like of being afraid of an other, but it was also a little bit deeper than that in that like the idea of a different species like being the head and not
Right, because
us.
he seemed to respect them. It was like
Yeah,
he's like, look, this is just the cards we're dealt. Like, we have to fight you because you guys obviously are the better like race. And
right. And it's or that was the whole point, was like this will decide who's the
sure,
better.
right.
Like we're not going to go out. Yeah.
I just thought that was really interesting. I was expecting him to be just like, apes are bad, therefore we kill them, and it was, I thought his character was well developed and like to the point where you cared about him, and it was like his sort of death
Yeah.
was actually sad.
Yeah, it was weird because in the same point you wanted him like you realize he was an awful person but also kind of got
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Right.
Which is the hallmarks of like a good villain. It's like that's why everybody liked Darth Vader. In addition to just like being cool, it was the fact that they turned him into like a tragic figure that
Well,
people
and
really
everybody
liked
really
it.
liked his development in the prequels, where we really got to know about his feelings towards sand.
Exactly, exactly, and pod racing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope people can tell when we're being sarcastic.
Right. And that is always, we're not being sarcastic when we're talking about how amazing the prequels are.
I did have some logistical questions. Okay, so I had made the comment to you the other day, and I'll kind of repeat it here. Um, to me, the best like comparison trilogy, like from a different movie series, that always makes me think of what this trilogy is now is Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. And just to explain what I mean by that, so like the first movie in both series were kind of like a really good movie, solid, good reboot of like both Batman and Planet of the Apes. And then the second one like took this like darker tone shift and like ramped everything up, had this like amazing pacing, and were like these long epic movies. And this third one, which I think you might disagree with me on, to me it reminded me a lot of Dark Knight Rises. Like I loved the third Dark Knight movie; it was absolutely amazing. I felt like there was some like minor plot holes in it, like why did every single cop go underneath Gotham City to get trapped, things like that. And so like, but overall, it was like a solid, amazing ending. That's how I felt about this movie. I really, really liked it a lot. But the second one is probably still my favorite, and I feel like it's the strongest out of the three. But this was like a very close second. And part of the only reason I would make it a close second, and maybe you can walk me away from this ledge, is because there was some things that like I accept for the sake of the movie, but it was kind of like, okay, well, I'll accept that, but I don't really know why that happened like it did. And to give you an example, once the apes are all locked up and then they eventually form a plan to escape the base and everything, um, there's that whole segment where this always bugs me in movies. Uh, the entire plot of getting out like the children apes were completely hinging upon a guard doing something stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like that kind of annoyed me a little bit because it's like, yeah, I could see where that could happen, but I could also just as easily see where that wouldn't happen. And then what do you do? So I'd prefer they go with the and then what do you do option
I agree. I
rather than completely hinging what happens on that.
I also have written down like that compound had to have the worst security coverage of any compound, like covering a group
Yeah,
of like
because they had
slaves.
a little girl just
Yeah, it
walk
was so. I
in,
was thinking like, oh, she got in because she's
it was a
human,
cool
but
scene,
instead,
but it bugged me. Yeah, up until they told her to hide, and I was like, okay, at least they're acknowledging the fact that she needs to hide. Like I was okay at that point, but up until that point, I was like, are we really just gonna? She's gonna run back and forth, and that's it. Like,
especially once you learned that they were expecting like a giant military force to come after them, it's like you think they'd be on a little bit
yeah,
higher alert than they were.
it's it's a little bit forgivable just because you are dealing with like a
True.
post-apocalyptic scenario, so things are always different. Things are never as tight. Even a tight operation like they're pretending to be, like they're clearly a little
And
crazy
they were
out there.
obviously
And I could
low
also
on
see
resources
them
because they had to get a slave army of monkeys to build a wall for them. So
right.
I
Right.
guess in hindsight, actually, that they were a smaller force than they really. So
Yeah,
maybe that's
that's
more
why I say those
forgivable than I
things
was
didn't
thinking.
ruin
But
the
yeah, the
movie.
whole
It
like
was, yeah,
we're gonna throw
exactly.
poop at you and you're gonna come down thing, that seemed a little.
Right.
It's a little thing, but it's like all it would have really taken for me to just totally forgive that is a scene or two showing that guard having a hot head. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
But the reality is they could have shot that and it easily could have broken the flow of the movie. And like while I was watching it, it didn't break me out of it. But like I can totally see that being an issue while you're watching, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So but yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree. Like that's one of those things that bugs me. The thing that bugged me more was just the lack of coverage. But I think actually we kind of just explained that away relatively easily.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. That was a little contrived. Specifically, well, I was gonna say
Yeah.
specifically getting him to go over the hole, but actually I thought the way they got him to go over the hole was kind of clever. Like, they did the poop thing,
Mhm.
and then it was like they clearly had like moved out of his way in a specific way, and then they had a person throw it from an angle that would make him walk towards that direction. So I actually thought that while I was watching it, I was like, oh, that was
Yeah.
actually kind of clever. It wasn't like he just happened to end up in the right spot. They actually sort of like forced him that way very intentionally.
Now, I will say this. One of the other things that makes me be a little bit forgivable of that point as well is just that, and this is kind of cynical, but like they were just like, it wasn't hinging upon all of them getting out, just the children.
Right.
So, like, hypothetically, they had a way out. Like, they had figured it out and they were going to get out. But obviously,
Well,
this isn't a rated R Planet of the
and
Apes.
that wasn't
That's
the
super
original
dark.
plan, right?
It was.
Remember, the original plan was
Yeah.
the tunnels, but it started flooding the section where they were going to get the children. So
Yeah.
it was actually that multiple things would have.
I almost wish they just
Yeah, I
didn't
see
do
what
the
you're saying.
flooding thing.
It
for
definitely
that
wasn't
reason.
like necessary.
It was sort of irrelevant.
But also, it's kind of funny
Right.
that they got the smart apes to throw poop. Another question that I have written down that I was a little confused about was why were they so focused on trying to kill Caesar at the beginning of the movie? Because it seemed like once we started understanding that military group, they were clearly way more concerned about the war that they were going to have with the other, military group. Or was that, am I getting my timelines mixed up? Did that not actually happen until later?
Well, didn't it say like at the beginning of the movie that this was like an ongoing like 2-year thing?
Yeah.
For some reason, the word 2 years is stuck in my head, and I don't remember the specifics.
No, I think you're right now. That
And
you
so,
say
like
that.
to me, it's more of something like this had started, and this other army situation has developed since it started, and so that was kind of like, let's get this over with, and there's
Yeah,
like
I
ending
think you're
that
right.
conflict by trying to kill him. And yeah, that makes sense that you would ask that, but it also didn't bother me.
It didn't really
too
bother
much,
me.
so
It's just at
I
some
don't know.
point I had that thought, and I was like, "Huh, that was weird." So okay, so what other questions did you have then?
Well, my friend, now this isn't mine. I actually know my own answer to this, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about and get your perspective. The friend that saw it with me, he was saying that one of the things he always gets annoyed with in movies, and it's a common trope, is that like the military guy will get the person that he's after and like keep him alive. And he said like that was bugging him. He's like, well, why wouldn't you just kill Caesar? Like, you have him, like, just kill him. And I thought there was a pretty easily established answer to that. And I was like, well, one, he was just going to let him die, but he was fed and without them knowing. So he was just going to let him die out at one point in the movie. But also, I feel like it's now there's certainly room for debate about this amongst military minds, which we are not.
Well, you were not.
Yeah. There's a pretty established precedent for like hostage taking, like all throughout history.
Yeah, I mean, and they even in this movie showed like they could use him as leverage to control everybody else. Now, obviously, they, underestimated his ability to rally the troops kind of situation. So, from our perspective, obviously he's going to rally the troops. But from the military perspective, like, it's easy to see that. I mean, they even showed it in this movie that it was effective. Like, he wasn't going to break, but
Right.
everybody around him would. Like, they were going to push themselves harder to keep him alive. And so that totally
Yeah.
made sense to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like my kind of feelings towards this, like, yeah, I feel like hostage taking, making an example of a leader, is pretty common throughout history, and honestly, most times it works. Like a lot of times, those people don't get out, and it's only the sense that you know that this is a Planet of the Apes story and that they'll get out that would even remotely bug you,
Right.
because you know they're going to get out. So you're just thinking, well, why wouldn't he just kill him? Well, because like if this were something like Game of Thrones or Walking Dead, maybe they wouldn't make it out.
Right.
So it's just that sense that you know this is a PG-13 movie, that they're not just going to end it that bleakly.
And they made it clear too. It wasn't like Woody Harrelson cared about him really. He didn't hate him. It wasn't like he needed him dead or anything. So to him, he was just a tool.
Yeah, it wasn't like
he
a
was just trying to
personal
figure out a
vendetta.
way to get them to build the wall better, and it seemed like that actually worked pretty well for them.
If you remember the portion in the movie where Woody Harrelson basically does his villain monologue and tells Caesar his whole plan and his motivations and why he's doing what he's doing, there's a piece in it where, which we kind of touched on earlier, where he says like, well, we're like devolving and you guys are like the next stage and that's why we're fighting you, this and that. And he mentions in a point like whenever Caesar says like he doesn't have any like mercy or anything like that, and he does the whole speech about like, well, he had to kill his son and it was mercy because he's like, these people were starting to turn and so I killed them, and like, what would you have done? And he said like, I would have rather be killed than turn into that. And now, if you recall that, now fast forward to the end of the movie, one thing that I thought was interesting, and I feel like it was intentional, but I'm also not sure if there was a clear point that I missed. The end of the movie, after the apes get out, the other army shows up, the whole battle is raging on and everything. We find out that Woody Harrelson is like drunk and he's in his own quarters, like locked in because he can't talk anymore. So he's got this disease or whatever that's like devolving him. And Caesar goes in because he's been like struggling with this arc of like revenge and being like Koba and all this stuff. And so he like goes in there to shoot him, and he grabs the gun, points it at his head, and then ends up not shooting him. Now, what I thought was interesting about it is it was pretty ambiguous, because with that speech that Woody Harrelson said earlier, is that him like showing vengeance and letting him turn into that thing? Or is it him like washing his hands clean of it and deciding not to do
I
it?
think that was him recognizing that he now like felt empathy towards him and like
By letting him become that?
No, because he then gave him basically the gun. Like he placed it right next to him, loaded, cocked,
Yeah,
as like, hey, you can kill yourself. I know that's important for you, kind of thing.
that's a good
And then,
point.
he watched him, which, I think was kind of maybe letting himself have his revenge a little bit. But it was like
Right.
it was no longer like, I'm going to kill you. He gave that like choice back to Woody Harrelson. But like you're saying, he didn't take the gun or anything. It was, and my memory might be wrong, but my memory of it is that he placed it right next to him, like basically saying, "Here you go. I'm not going to kill you, but like I'm going to let you not
Yeah.
turn into this thing that I know you don't want to be."
So what things particularly stood out to you? Like, what did you like most about the movie?
Well, I feel like we've talked quite a bit. I mean, almost everything we've said is what we like, or little nitpicks that I feel like we've pretty much explained away.
Well, there is one thing I wanted to mention. I thought the entire opening was amazing, and up into like whenever whenever the military like raids their like waterfall
that was great.
territory, like all of that was great.
Man, when they were like raiding the what ended up being like a wall or whatever, and it's really quiet and everybody's, they're kind of talking over the radio, explaining what's going on to the other units. And then that gorilla grabs his shoulder. Did you not just go, oh my gosh, like he snuck up on him or whatever?
Yeah, I was like, what is right?
And then it was like your brain processes really quick, like, oh, guys have turned, and like you quickly, like the amount of exposition that they just did simply by doing that was really cool. It was like immediately you started understanding a couple things, and then they were calling him Donkey, and like,
right.
I just thought that was really cool. And that whole element was really cool. They were like the followers of Koba that have turned.
And I was actually legitimately shocked. Not that the second movie didn't have its like darkness to it, but like I was legitimately shocked that like they just that early in the movie just completely kill Caesar's wife and child, who was his kid was kind of like a main character to a degree in the second movie. And so it was kind of like
I think that was super important to his character arc. Like that's what drove the whole plot of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just like, I didn't know it up until that point what this movie was going to be.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, honestly, it was a smart move. I mean, some people can say it's cheap to kill off characters, but it wasn't just like, hey, we're going to kill these characters to shock you. It was like, hey, this is what, like you said, what's going to drive kind of the tone and the point of the movie. And yeah, I just, it did shock me though. Like I wasn't expecting that. And then once that happened, you kind of get where everything's going.
And that opening sort of gave you a little bit of the the war so that you could then spend
Yeah.
most of the movie learning about the characters to build up to
Yeah.
the ending war.
Yeah. For a movie called War for the Planet of the Apes, it's a 2.5 hour movie with only about 15-minute bookends on each end
Yeah,
of
yeah.
actual fighting,
Right.
which is fine. That's not a criticism. It was great.
That yeah, it could have easily just been a bunch of cool set pieces, but instead it was a much more interesting character study that happened to be, apes.
Yeah, and the two battles themselves were like the opening was more small in close quarters in the jungle, and then the end was like this big,
More what you were
visually
expecting.
massive
Yeah.
open. And
Now, that would be the only real criticism that I have for this movie. It kind of levels on that ending. I feel like that battle it felt a little like it felt like it got the least amount of attention of everything in the movie. Like
yeah, yeah,
it was a little anticlimactic, which I was actually okay with because it wasn't really that important. Like it
about
wasn't
that.
supposed to be a big battle. The apes didn't even fight in it at all. So like that was fine, but it had a little like it was like honestly weirdly in a movie with mostly CG apes. It was the most fake feeling thing. It just kind of felt like you were watching a like uh really impressive low budget like war scene because it was, it's just kind of vast
I thought
expanse.
it was cool. I really wasn't paying too close attention to every little thing because, like you said, it wasn't the focus. So maybe that was why I
And that's what
didn't.
I mean. It was like there was just huge, like especially whenever all the people showed up at the end. It was like it felt kind of like Zack Snydery, where you're just seeing sort of dead expanse of land filled with just enormous amounts of exactly the same looking people. The actual battle itself was mostly just rockets going back and forth and helicopters, which
Yeah,
again were less convincing to me than the apes, which isn't to say they were bad. It's just that everything around it was so good and folk detailed that it kind of almost
yeah,
stood out. But like I said, like it doesn't really bother me because it's so secondary. It's kind of like complaining about the deer in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. It's like that was a little
right.
piece. It's weird to say that the giant ending battle was just a little piece, but really it was the apes escaping and Caesar sort of having his final face to face, ending with Woody Harrelson's character. Those were the things that mattered.
Yeah,
And the battle was just sort of the backdrop. It's no different than just the woods almost in that setting.
you kind of hit on something, which is why I think like these this trilogy is like one of my favorite like science fiction trilogies, probably of all time. Like I honestly, and whenever they first announced the first reboot, like way back when, I knew like, oh, that would be cool, I'll go see that, but I didn't really think it would be anything particularly special. But it's kind of changed in my view because like these movies, the first movie that gets you to care so much about what I thought was originally going to be the villains, because in the old Planet of the Apes movies, that's kind of what's going on. Like they're like it doesn't spend so much time with the apes, but in this new series it does. And so like the first movie got me to actually care about these CGI characters a lot more than other stuff that I was used to. And then the second movie was an action movie that made me feel the entire time that I didn't want anybody to fight.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this third movie, like you kind of mentioned at the end, it's a movie where the center stage is not all the action that's going on. That was cool, but it's just kind of peripheral in the background. And like it's just interesting because, and I don't mean to keep bashing on like Michael Bay's Transformers movies, but it's like I remember the summer that the second Planet of the Apes movie came out. That came out like the same weekend or somewhere around the same time that Transformers came out. And Transformers notoriously gets bad reviews, but people go see them because they're fun action movies. And I just remember thinking like, I will take this Planet of the Apes movie any day because it's like not to be cheesy, but it's like about something. And like, whereas in this movie, it's just portraying like death, action by the numbers. Like this other movie, it's actually getting you to think and you don't want people to fight. You just want
Right.
everybody to get along. And if a movie can make you do that, even for just a couple hours, it was just very impressive.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about this series is I keep finding myself, even in the first movie, which wasn't the same director, like you still felt moments like that. Like I remember that, like when I rewatched it with my sister and her husband recently, even the first one, like I hadn't seen it in such a long time, and there were moments that like kind of get you emotionally or whatever. Like there's that scene, I don't know if you remember, where like Caesar's at that zoo place and they lock him up in the cage and he's like drawing his like scraping on the concrete his
Oh
window.
yeah, yeah, because that was their like symbol of the resistance or whatever, wasn't it? I forgot about that.
Yeah, and even one of the most impressive scenes in all three of the movies is still the first time he talks and says the word no.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that was just like perfectly paced. And so yeah, I really like these movies a lot.
It's kind of cool. They did that with Maurice. That's the orangutan, right? They kind of did that in this movie, didn't they? I can't
Yeah.
remember what the moment was. I just remember thinking like, oh, this was his no moment where
Yeah.
he says words for the first time.
It's so interesting with the talking too, because even after that, when you get into the second and third movie where they're talking more frequently, like they still are just genius at like how they do the talking because they use the broken English as a logical, practical thing, but they also like I feel like they're using it on purpose so that like it forces you to realize that when they're actually saying something, it has like
Yeah,
it's
right.
very impactful. Like it means something.
It was
They wouldn't
interesting
be
too.
talking otherwise.
The funny guy, I can't remember was. Oh, his name was Bad Ape or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wasn't that what he kept saying? I
Yeah.
for whatever reason I didn't put this
Yeah.
together while I was watching it, but it was afterwards when I was thinking about the movie that I kind of realized this. At first I thought it was a plot hole, and then I realized I think it wasn't. I don't think he knew sign language.
Right.
And
Right.
like, did they make that a point on purpose? I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, they
okay.
did.
Well,
When
I
they
feel
first
dumb
met
now.
him, like he was like one of the apes was like signing to him and they said like I don't think he knows. Oh, he didn't say I don't think he know. I think he said like he's not one of us because he didn't sign back.
Oh, I did not put that together. The thing that made me
Yeah.
realize that, oh wait, they did think about this was when Maurice is trying to get him to jump on his back, and they weren't talking. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is weird. And then it wasn't until afterwards that I kind of put together like, oh, like he was trying to get him on his back. They couldn't communicate because one of them knew sign language and the other one could speak, but they didn't know each other's thing. I just thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, they did mention it, and I'm surprised that I ended up liking that character too because I thought it was going to be super annoying. One last question I have for you. So, kind of touching on what I mentioned earlier, do you want to see more Planet of the Apes movies in this series? Like, even if they're like, let's say 5 years from now, they say they give another director a shot at doing a standalone.
So that would be that's the thing. I would be happy with them exploring the universe more. Like that's totally fine with me, and I'd probably be interested in it. But I wanna let Matt Reeves do something else. Now I know he's doing Batman,
Batman.
right?
Yeah, he's shown he's like really good with. He reminds me a lot of. I'm not saying he is the same because there's some differences in their style, but he does remind me a lot of Christopher Nolan, and at least just on the pacing front.
Yeah.
And that's why I drew such heavy comparison between the Dark Knight trilogy and his Planet of the Apes. Even though, again, he didn't direct the first one, but it was very much in that vein. And but like at least the two that he does, it just I see a lot of similarities and like their pacing, like I was telling my friend that saw it with me in Grand Rapids after we saw the third one this weekend that one thing that I noticed is like I like that he's not in a hurry to get anywhere.
Right,
In like a
yes.
good way though. It's not that it's boring. It's like for instance, one of the big issues that people had with Batman versus Superman was that it was like even me who liked the movie, it was like three movies of material like crammed into once.
Right.
Like it was like, oh, what if we did this? And, oh, and this, and then they're just like, why don't we just do it all in
Right.
one movie?
And you have a bunch of things that happen, but you don't have time to learn or care about any of the characters.
Yeah, and then in this though, it was like maybe they sat down and was like, hey, we got about five good ideas. And they're like, great, let's space it out over three
And it
movies.
almost feels like it was like they would intentionally rip out anything that didn't serve the the story or character development specifically. Like it seems like
Yeah.
every single thing that happens matters to the story they're trying to tell. Like there's very few things in any of these movies that feels like it's in there because it's cool.
Yeah.
It's like everything is important to serve the story. And maybe, in reality, they thought of cool ideas and then built a story around it. But it almost feels more like they really truly let the
Yeah.
story
If
drive
they did
everything
do that,
else.
it's organic.
Yes, they did it
feels
extremely
organic.
well.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess my overall opinion is like I love these movies just because they've done what all of them, including the old series, I think did really well in its best moments. Is like they're taking they're not just like generic action movies that are just trying to capitalize on like nerd culture. They like this new series didn't have to be deep on any level. They could have just banked in off of the brand recognition and just done some
Yeah,
cool
like Tim
action
Burton.
movies. And even then, I probably would have seen them and liked them. Yeah, yeah, it's a perfect example. Just not have done the weird ending. um, but they decided to go a deeper level, and I feel like it'll stand the test of time. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everybody will forget about them, but I love them.
So I'm going to ask you two
I'm
different
happy.
questions. The first is, how would you rank the three movies? In what order? I think you already answered this, but I'm just curious.
2, 3, 1.
2, 3, 1.
Two being the best.
Okay, and I would say 3, 2, 1. So
Gotcha.
I didn't move
That's
you
fair.
on that, and I haven't seen Dawn. I haven't seen 2 in a long time, so I reserve the right to change that at any given time. And then the second question is, I think the thing that's kind of becoming a norm on our movie episodes. What Rotten Tomatoes rating would you give this one?
The new one.
This
I
one.
would probably say about an 85%.
85. Where do you put Dawn?
Yeah.
The number 2.
Oh, I would put it at like a 95%.
Okay, yeah, I'd say.
And then the first one, I'd put it in 80.
Yeah, I think I'd put the first one at like right at 80 for me, and then Dawn gets into probably 90, and then this one's probably like 91, 92. Those two are really close, but I think I like this one more.
Yeah, I could. Yeah, and again, like I said, that's fair. Like I really love that second one.
Yeah,
so it's just more of a personal thing.
I think the two, like, I think I liked Woody Harrelson's character more than Gary Oldman's character. That probably contributes to it more than almost anything. And Caesar's development or arc was really, really good in this one.
Yeah,
but
I agree with that. I think the reason why I picked 2 is like keep in mind when the second one came out. Not to say that there aren't occasionally like smart, thoughtful sci-fi movies, but I feel like that's more of a newer thing where like this was pre Star Wars. This was pre like Ex Machina. This was pre like a lot of these newer science fiction stuff that's coming out. So really the only like big like sci-fi blockbusters you had up around that time period was stuff like Transformers and the superhero movies, which occasionally the superhero movies will bring out something cool. Like X-Men has always kind of been like an allegory for like the fringe society people and things like that.
But neither of us are going to pretend that the X-Men movies have been at the careful, measured approach that the Planet of the Apes movies have been.
And so, like, to me, it really like it. I just remember, for me, at least for science fiction like blockbuster movies, it was kind of like a watershed moment where I was like, oh, holy cow, I forgot like these can be like science fiction can be really good. Like I had forgotten because the only stuff like that are like classics that everybody knows about, obviously. But that was the first like modern one where I was like, you know what? I just love this movie. So that's why I put it there, probably for sentimental reasons. And it, in the moment, it was like a big effect on me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There you have it. War for the Planet of the Apes.
We're probably going to have a couple more movie episodes in the summer just because it's been so jam-packed, but
yeah,
we'll make sure we get some non-movie episodes mixed in there as well.
And if anybody likes the new Planet of the Apes movie, or maybe you didn't like the new Planet of the Apes movie and you want to let us know why we're wrong, or maybe if we were talking about the plot holes and you thought that we missed something that was really clear that we didn't understand, then please visit us on Facebook. Let us know what you think. Let us know why we're wrong. If you'd like to leave us a review on iTunes, that would be absolutely great. You can visit us on the website at atownfm.com, on Twitter and Facebook at atownfm, and all of those are without a slash or hyphen between the A and the town.